The alien princess mocked the human warrior. Then her mother revealed, "He's your father." The blade came down fast, and Cole Raines caught it with his bare forearm. Not because he was trying to be impressive, not because he had a death wish. He did it because the ceremonial scanner at the entrance to the Vethari Grand Hall had stripped him of every weapon he carried, including the folding knife he kept in his boot, the thin wire garrote in his collar lining, and the ceramic blade taped flat against the inside of his left wrist. All gone. And when a 6'4" alien soldier with 4 arms and violet skin decided to swing a serrated ritual sword at the head of an unarmed human diplomat, you improvised. The forearm block sent pain shooting up through Cole's elbow, rattling into his shoulder like electricity. The alien soldier blinked in surprise. That was all the opening Cole needed. He stepped inside the reach of those 4 arms, grabbed the lowest 2 by the wrists, twisted hard in opposite directions, and used the soldier's own stumbling momentum to drop him face first into the polished obsidian floor. He pressed one knee between the alien's shoulder blades and held him there, steady, breathing calm. The entire hall went silent. Cole looked up slowly. 300 alien dignitaries, ambassadors, military officers, and servants stared back at him. The air smelled like burnt copper and something floral, the Vethari equivalent of tension sweat, he supposed. Tall arched ceilings caught the low hum of some distant engine. Candlelight from bioluminescent fixtures flickered across the faces of people who had never in their lives seen a human move like that. Then the laughter came. It started soft, almost like a purr, and grew into something musical and cutting at once. Cole tracked the sound to his right. Seated on a raised dais at the far end of the hall, draped across a chair that was more throne than furniture, was a young woman, alien, clearly Vethari, with lavender skin, 4 slender arms folded with practiced elegance and gold markings running from her temples down to her jaw. She was laughing at him, not at the soldier he had just put on the floor, at Cole. "A human," she said, loud enough for the hall to hear. Her voice was crisp, almost musical, but the amusement behind it had teeth. "They sent a human to our hall on a day of formal alliance talks." She tilted her head, and one of her upper hands gestured at Cole the way you might gesture at a stray animal that had wandered in off the street. "Does it even know what it is doing here?" Cole straightened up slowly. He let the soldier go, stepped back, and smoothed the front of his dark dress uniform with 2 practiced tugs at the hem. He did not look away from her. "Sergeant Major Cole Raines," he said. His voice did not shake. "Earth Diplomatic Security Corps, attached to Ambassador Lena Graves. And you are." Another ripple of surprised murmurs went through the hall. The young woman's amusement did not vanish, but it shifted slightly, the way amusement does when someone unexpected talks back. She leaned forward on her throne chair, chin resting on one of her upper hands. "You speak to me directly," she said, "without title, without acknowledgement of my station." "You laughed at me first," Cole said evenly. "Without reason, without introduction. I figure that makes us even." Someone at the far left of the hall made a low sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. The young woman on the dais sat up straighter. Her gold markings seemed to glow a fraction brighter, which Cole would later learn was a Vethari physiological response to irritation. She studied him with something colder now behind her violet eyes. "You pinned one of my honor guard to the floor," she said. "He swung a blade at me first," Cole replied. "I was polite enough not to break anything." She stared at him for 3 long seconds. Then she said very clearly, as if addressing the room and not just him, "This creature is not a warrior. It is a trick, sent by frightened humans who know they cannot compete with Vethari strength. They dress their servants in uniforms and hope no one notices." She leaned back again, dismissive now. "Remove it from the formal proceedings. Humans have no place in this hall today." Cole did not move. He stood in the center of the hall floor with one of her guards still sitting up slowly behind him, and he looked at her directly and said nothing for a moment. The silence was deliberate, measured. Then quietly, "Ambassador Graves will hear about this. So will the Joint Council. You just ask that human security be removed from a scheduled diplomatic meeting. That's going to be in a report." He paused. "I hope your title comes with lawyers." Her gold markings flared bright. And that was how Cole Raines met Princess Saya of the HFY Dominion, for the first time, in the worst possible way, and had no idea, not even a shadow of a guess, that 23 years before that day, her mother had sat across a campfire from a young human soldier on a dying moon and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He did not know that yet. Neither did she. But someone in that hall did. In the far back, standing very still near the side archway where the light barely reached, a tall HFY woman in gray ceremonial robes watched Cole Raines with eyes that had not blinked in almost 2 minutes. Her markings were copper instead of gold, and they ran in patterns far more complex than her daughter's. Her hands, all 4 of them, were folded quietly in front of her. Her expression was perfectly controlled. But if you had been close enough to see her eyes, truly see them, you would have noticed that they were wet. Empress Vala of the HFY Dominion had not seen Cole Raines in 23 years. She had not expected this to be how it started. She stepped back into the shadow of the archway and pressed 2 of her hands flat against the cold stone wall and breathed very carefully. The way you breathe when something you buried long ago suddenly walks back through the door, wearing your daughter's eyes and your old soldier's posture. And you realize that the secret you have carried alone for 2 decades is about 3 conversations away from becoming a catastrophe. Or a miracle. She was not sure which yet. Cole, meanwhile, had been escorted not forcibly but firmly to a side chamber to wait while the formal proceedings reorganized without him. He sat on a bench that was too tall for human proportions, feet barely touching the floor, and pulled out a small notebook he kept in his breast pocket. He wrote 3 words. Then he crossed them out. He wrote them again. He sat there looking at the words, and the hall beyond the carved door hummed with 100 conversations in a language he only half understood. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, he felt the faint, strange, directionless sensation that something important had just happened, that the universe had shifted 1 small degree in a direction he could not name, and he had no idea why. Cole had been in enough strange rooms to know when a room was watching him. He had spent the better part of the morning waiting in that side chamber, which the HFY aide had called a guest alcove, which was a polite way of saying a place to put people you did not want visible during formal proceedings. The bench was carved from something that looked like black glass, and it was cold, and it was built for a species with a different hip structure than humans, so Cole had long since given up trying to sit comfortably on it, and was instead pacing the narrow length of the room in slow, measured steps. He had counted the floor tiles, 72. He had examined the bioluminescent fixtures and concluded they worked on a biological oscillation rather than any electrical system. He had found 2 points of structural weakness in the left wall, a possible exit behind a decorative panel near the ceiling, and a ventilation shaft that a person of his dimensions could probably navigate if the situation required it. This was not paranoia. This was training. 15 years in the Earth Diplomatic Security Corps, and before that 7 years in the 3rd Orbital Rangers, had made certain habits as automatic as breathing. The door opened. Cole did not jump. He turned slowly, weight balanced, hands loose at his sides. It was not an aide. It was not the ambassador. It was not even one of the princess's armored honor guard. It was an older HFY woman in gray robes, moving quietly, the kind of quiet that comes not from stealth, but from decades of learning how to take up as little space as possible in rooms full of important people. Her copper markings were intricate, layered over each other in patterns that Cole vaguely remembered from a cultural briefing he had read 6 months ago but could not place precisely. 4 arms like all HFY, but her posture carried weight differently. Not military, not ceremonial, something older than both. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, and then she looked at Cole. He looked back. "Sergeant Major Raines," she said. Her voice was low and steady, and her accent in English was careful, precise, the kind that comes from learning a language from recordings rather than from people. "You know my name," he said. "You have me at a disadvantage." "My name is Vala," she said. Cole's briefing files surfaced in his memory the way good training always did. He remembered the name. He remembered the rank attached to it. His expression did not change, but his posture shifted, just slightly, the way it always did when the stakes of a room quietly doubled. "Empress Vala," he said. She did not correct him, which confirmed it. She moved to the far side of the chamber, not sitting, just standing near the dark glass wall with two of her hands folded in front of her and the other two loose at her sides, and she looked at him with an expression that Cole, who had spent 15 years reading rooms full of difficult people, could not quite name. It was not hostility. It was not warmth. It was something in between those two things, the expression of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a conversation and is now not sure how to begin it. "You were with the 3rd Orbital Rangers," she said. "Assigned to the Karen IV campaign 23 years ago." Cole went still. Not the kind of still that shows up in the body. The internal kind. The kind that happens when someone says something that reaches past your professional training and touches something personal. "That's a matter of record," he said carefully. "The moon called Tessara," she said. "The medical evacuation camp at the edge of the eastern crater field. You were a staff sergeant then, 22 years old." Cole said nothing. Vala's copper markings shifted in tone, barely noticeable, the Vethara equivalent of a breath held and released. "I was there also," she said. "Not as an empress, not as a Vethara diplomatic envoy. I was there as a refugee. My ship had been hit in the orbital engagement. I had reached the surface in an emergency pod with 3 of my attendants, 2 of whom did not survive the landing. Your unit found us on the 3rd day." Cole's memory was very good. It was one of the things that made him effective at his job. He let it work now, pulling back 23 years without trying to force it, letting the images surface the way they do when they are real and not constructed. A crater field on Tessara, the smell of sulfur and recycled oxygen from portable life support. 3 Vethare survivors, one of them badly injured, brought into the medical camp by his squad. Heated argument among the officers about protocol, about whether refugees from a technically neutral species counted as non-combatants, about what the rules of the campaign said. Cole had not waited for the argument to finish. He had gotten the injured Vethare into the med bay himself and stood outside the tent until the medics were done. He remembered one of the survivors in particular. He remembered her because she had not acted like a refugee. She had acted like someone who was used to making decisions and was very deliberately not making any right now, watching everything with quiet, careful eyes. She had refused the standard ration packs, and he had found her something else because she had explained, calmly and without drama, that the protein composition of human rations would cause a Vethare reaction. He had listened. He had found something suitable from a supply cache meant for multi-species operations. She had thanked him with 2 of her hands pressed flat together, a Vethare gesture he had not understood at the time. He was starting to understand it now. "You were her," he said, not a question. "I was her," Vala said. Cole sat down on the edge of the cold black bench, not because his legs were weak, because sitting down gave him something to do with his body while his mind ran through what she was telling him and what she was not yet saying. "You spent 9 days at that camp," he said. "We got you evacuation transport. I remember signing the forms." "You did," she said. "You also argued with 2 senior officers who wanted to put my surviving attendant in the general holding area. You used language I do not think was regulation." "It was not," Cole said. The faintest thing that might have been a smile moved at the corner of her mouth. It lasted about half a second. Cole looked at her steadily. He was working through something. He could feel the shape of it, the way you feel a word at the edge of your tongue that you cannot quite say. 9 days, 23 years, a daughter with gold markings who sat on a throne and laughed at human soldiers, an empress who had walked into a holding room and started a conversation about a crater field on a dead moon. He said very quietly, "How old is the princess?" Vala did not look away. Her expression did not change. But every one of her markings shifted to a color Cole had not seen from a Vethara before, a deep copper rose that started at her temples and moved slowly downward. 22 years, she said. Cole sat very still. I was told, Vala continued, and her voice was steady in the way that voices are steady when a person has rehearsed something for a very long time and is finally saying it, that the genetic compatibility between humans and Vethara was essentially zero. That was the accepted science. I believed it. I had no reason not to. A pause. I was wrong. Cole looked at the floor, the 72 tiles. He counted 5 of them before he looked back up. She doesn't know, he said. No, Vala said. Does anyone? 3 people, Vala said. One is a physician who delivered her and has been silent by oath. One is my first attendant who was at the camp with me and has been silent by loyalty. And now you. Cole stood up. He walked to the far end of the narrow room and stood facing the wall for a moment. Then he turned around. Why are you telling me this now? He said. Vala's copper rose markings had faded back to their usual deep tone. Because she mocked you today in front of 300 witnesses, she said. And because you handled it with more dignity than most of my generals would have managed. And because I have been watching the peace talks between our governments collapse slowly for 6 months, and I think that the woman who could save them just ordered the one person in this building who might matter most to be removed from the room. Cole looked at her for a long moment. That's a lot to put on a man who was just told he has a daughter, he said. Yes, Vala agreed. It is. Cole put his hands in his pockets, which was something he almost never did in professional settings and which happened now entirely without his permission. He looked at the door, then at the wall, then at Vala. Does she look like me at all? He said. Vala was quiet for a moment. Her eyes, she said, when she concentrates on something and does not know she is being watched, the left side of her mouth when she is trying not to show that something surprised her. Cole nodded slowly. The hum of the great hall beyond the door continued. Somewhere out there, 300 aliens were debating the future of 2 civilizations, and a 22-year-old princess was probably still annoyed about a human she had laughed at and already half forgotten. Cole looked at Vala one more time. I need 24 hours, he said. The main session resumes in 18, she said. Then I need 18, he said. Vala moved toward the door. She paused with her hand on the frame, 2 of her other hands folded in front of her, and she looked back at him in a way that he would think about for a long time afterward. For what it is worth, she said, those 9 days on Tessara were the most honest days I had in a decade. I did not forget them. Then she left, and Cole stood alone in the cold glass room, and the universe finished shifting that one small degree it had started earlier, and this time he felt it all the way through. Princess Seiya was not a person who spent time worrying about things she had already dismissed. She had dismissed the human soldier approximately 4 minutes after he had been removed from the formal hall. He was an anomaly, a mildly interesting one, she admitted, if only because he had taken down one of her honor guard without apparently trying very hard, and because he had spoken to her directly without flinching. But anomalies did not change the shape of things. They were just noise. She had a great deal of experience filtering noise. What was less easy to filter was the conversation she had been pulled into with her mother. Empress Vala had requested a private meeting, which was unusual. Her mother was present at many of the diplomatic sessions and was technically the highest authority in the Vethari Dominion, though for the past 4 years she had been gradually transferring formal leadership to Seiya as part of the succession plan. Their relationship was functional and generally respectful, but not what Seiya would describe as warm. Vala was a woman who kept most of herself below the surface. Seiya had inherited the leadership title, but apparently not the restraint. They sat now in a small arched room off the main corridor, just the two of them. Tea had been brought, the Vethari kind, deep red and faintly bitter, in thin ceramic cups. Neither of them had touched it. "You asked me to dismiss the human," Vala said. "Yes," Saya said, "and he was dismissed." "I am not sure why that requires a private meeting." "Because he should not have been dismissed," Vala said. "And because you made a decision in public that was based on prejudice rather than observation, and those decisions have a habit of becoming very expensive later." Saya felt the mild flicker of irritation that she always felt when her mother corrected her, which was also the irritation she felt when she knew the correction might be valid. "He is a human," she said, "dressed as a security escort, in a hall of Vethari dignitaries at a formal session." "He dropped Sentinel Commander Orath in under 3 seconds, Vala said, "without any weapons, using a method none of our soldiers use." "That does not make him." "It makes him dangerous," Vala said. "And people who are dangerous are worth understanding, not mocking." Saya looked at her mother. There was something underneath the words that she could not identify. Not quite urgency, not quite nervousness. Something controlled but barely, the way Vala always looked when something was pressing on her from the inside, and she was deciding how much of it to let out. "What is this about?" Saya said. "The peace talks," Vala said. "What else?" Saya leaned back, not quite satisfied with that answer but choosing for now to accept it. "The talks are not going well," she said. "We are 3 days in and the humans have not agreed to a single territorial boundary point. Their ambassador is careful, but their positions are rigid." "Their positions are rigid because they do not trust us," Vala said. "And they do not trust us because they believe the Vethari look at them the way you looked at that soldier this morning." "I looked at him the way anyone would." "You laughed," Vala said, "in front of 300 witnesses, at a human who had just demonstrated extraordinary capability and had done nothing to you personally except speak directly." She paused. "That will be in every report from every observer in that room by tonight. The human networks are already discussing it." Saya pressed her lips together. She hated when her mother was right in a way that she could not argue with. "What do you suggest?" she said flatly. "Invite him back," Vala said. "Not as a dismissed security escort, as a guest of the household. Let him participate in the secondary sessions. Give him room to demonstrate what he actually is, rather than what you assumed." "And what is he?" Vala looked at her for a moment that lasted just slightly too long. "Someone worth knowing," she said, "more than you realize." Saya looked at her mother carefully. "That is a strange thing to say about a human diplomat's security escort." "It is an honest thing," Vala said. The conversation ended there, with the tea still untouched and Saya still watching her mother's face for the thing she could not find a name for. She left the meeting feeling unsettled in a way she did not enjoy, which was also a way she associated with her mother's presence more than any other person in her life. She found Orath in the corridor outside, her senior honor guard, who was holding himself with careful dignity. Despite the fact that his shoulder had been wrenched at an angle it was not supposed to go, and there was bruising along one side of his jaw from where the floor had introduced itself. He was too proud to say anything about it, which Saya respected, even if she found his wounded pride slightly amusing. "Tell me," she said, "the human, was it skill or luck?" Orath considered this with more seriousness than she had expected. "Skill," he said. "He read my position before I completed the swing." He chose the contact point on his own arm deliberately, the dense bone structure just below the elbow. He angled his body so my momentum went into the floor and not into him. Then he used my forearms against me. He knew how we move. He studied Vethari combat. He was prepared, Orath said. He came into a hall where he knew he had no weapons, and he came in prepared. Saya thought about that as she walked back toward the primary chambers. a human who had studied HFY physiology and combat patterns before walking unarmed into a diplomatic hall. Not a servant, not a trick, something else. She did not like being wrong. She especially did not like being wrong in front of 300 people. She found the aide responsible for protocol management and said, in her most neutral tone, the one that people who worked for her had learned to be cautious of, have Sergeant Major Rains relocated from the guest alcove to the East Wing chambers. Give him appropriate accommodation. Inform him that tomorrow's secondary sessions will include a place for him. The aide blinked twice, the HFY equivalent of visible surprise, then composed herself and said, "As you wish." Saya went back to her rooms and stood at the tall, curved window that looked out over the blue-white landscape of the HFY capital, and she thought about a human who had caught a blade with his arm, and then straightened his uniform and asked for her name, and she tried to figure out what about it kept bothering her. She came to no satisfying answer. But she did notice, somewhere in the back of her mind, that the way he had looked at her, not with deference, not with fear, and not with the kind of performance that most people produced when they were looking at someone with power, had reminded her of something. The quality of it, the steadiness. It had reminded her, she realized slowly and with some confusion, of looking in a mirror. She dismissed the thought as meaningless. She was becoming quite good at dismissing things that were inconvenient. But this one came back 3 more times before she fell asleep. The East Wing chambers were a considerable upgrade from the guest alcove. Cole had not complained about the alcove. He had been in significantly worse places than a cold bench in an alien hall, and complaining about accommodations was not a habit he had ever developed. But the East Wing room was something else: wide, arched ceiling, bioluminescent lighting that pulsed gently at a rhythm close enough to human breathing to be calming, and a window that looked out over a canyon lit from below by some geological process that made the stone glow amber-orange in the dark. He stood at that window for a long time after the aide left. He had tried Ambassador Graves on a secure channel and gotten her message acknowledgement, which meant she was either still in session or had been told not to talk to him yet. He had written 3 different versions of a briefing memo in his notebook, all of which he had crossed out, because none of them said what they needed to say without saying everything else at the same time, and he was not yet sure how much everything else he was allowed to say. He had a daughter. He said the sentence in his mind several times in different orders, with different emphasis on different words, and none of the versions made it feel real. He had a 22-year-old daughter who was a HFY princess, and who had laughed at him this morning in front of 300 people, and her mother was an empress who had found him in a side room and told him this as calmly as someone reporting a weather forecast. He thought about being 22 years old on Tessara. He had been a different person then, though not so different as the years made it easy to imagine. Still careful, still watchful, still the kind of soldier who filled out the forms and stood outside the medical tent because the thing was the right thing to do and the argument about protocol could happen without him. He remembered Vala as a presence more than specific features, someone quiet in a way that was not passivity, someone watching everything with eyes that processed rather than just observed. They had talked in the evenings, during the 3 hours when the acid winds came and everyone stayed in the shelters and had nothing to do but wait. He had understood perhaps 40% of what she said, and she had understood perhaps 60% of what he said, and despite this, or maybe because of it, those conversations had felt like the most straightforward ones of the whole deployment. He had not known her name, she had not offered it, he had not asked, because rank and title among the HFY were complicated in ways his briefing hadn't fully covered, and he had not wanted to make a mistake. He had called her ma'am, which she had accepted without correction. She had called him the soldier, which he had also accepted because it was accurate. When the evacuation came, she had pressed both her upper hands flat together in that gesture he had not understood and said something in HFY that the translation unit only half caught. The half it caught was, "This will not be forgotten." It had not been, apparently, by either of them. Cole turned from the window and sat on the edge of the sleeping platform, which was built for Vethari proportions and was therefore extremely wide, and he thought about tomorrow. The secondary sessions. The invitation that had come through the aide, delivered in careful language that was technically warm and practically a chess move. The princess had extended it. That meant something. He wasn't sure yet what. He pulled out his notebook and found a blank page. He wrote, "What does she know?" Then underneath, "What does she need to know?" Then he sat with his pen on the page for a long time. He crossed out the second question and wrote instead, "What does she deserve to know?" That one stayed. He did not sleep well. Not because the chamber was uncomfortable, but because he kept thinking about a mirror, about the quality of someone's gaze, about standing outside medical tents and making decisions that no one had asked you to make because the thing was simply the right thing to do, and wondering if that was a quality you could pass on without knowing you were passing it on, or if it was just something a person built in themselves and the similarity was coincidence. He was not ready to decide which. In the morning, he put on his dress uniform with all its small, careful habits, the tug at the hem, the check of the collar, the one moment of stillness before he moved into a room, and he went to find out what a princess looked like when she was not laughing. He found out in the secondary session hall, a smaller room than the grand hall, oval and warm-toned, with a table long enough for 12 people and currently seating 9. Ambassador Graves was there, and gave him a look that contained an entire conversation they would have to have later. 3 Vethari diplomatic aides, 2 human trade specialists, a cultural liaison from a third-party neutral species that looked roughly like a slow-moving stack of geometric shapes, and introduced itself as Correspondent 11. And Saya. She was already seated when he entered, and she watched him cross the room with an expression that was entirely different from the one she had worn in the grand hall. Not warm, not hostile, evaluating. The way a person looks at something they got wrong and are quietly recalibrating. Cole sat down across from her, which was where his name card was, which was not an accident. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Sergeant Major," she said, "I understand you have experience in joint species operational planning." "Some," Cole said. 7 years active deployment, 4 of those in multi-species units. "Then perhaps you can offer perspective on the territorial buffer zone proposal." She slid a document across the table with one of her lower hands, the Vethari way of indicating a less formal transfer. "The human team believes our proposed buffer is insufficient. We believe theirs is unworkable." Cole looked at the document, then he looked at her. "Before we get to that," he said, "I want to say something." Her markings shifted, a controlled shift but a real one. "Go ahead." "I don't hold grudges about yesterday," he said. "I want you to know that so it doesn't sit in the room with us and make everything harder." She was very still for a moment. "That is a strange opening for a territorial negotiation," she said. "We're not negotiating yet," Cole said. "We're figuring out if we can talk to each other. Different thing." Something happened in her expression, something small and fast there and gone. "You are direct," she said. "It saves time," he said. Saya looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then she said, "My proposed buffer includes 3 astronomical units on the contested spinward edge. Your ambassador believes this creates navigational dead zones." "She's right," Cole said. "But I think the reason you proposed 3 units instead of 2 is that you're worried about the Kessa lane approach vector." Saya's lower hand stopped moving. "That is a classified strategic concern," she said. "It's also an obvious one if you've looked at the stellar maps and you know Vethari patrol routes," Cole said. "You don't need 3 units. You need 1 unit plus a joint monitoring station at the approach midpoint. Humans handle the station logistics. Vethari control the sensor array. Both parties have visibility. Neither party has unilateral advantage." There was a silence in the room. Correspondent 11 made a sound that its translation unit rendered as interesting. Ambassador Graves was looking at Cole with an expression he recognized, surprised and trying not to show it. Saya was looking at him differently, not the evaluation from when he walked in, something else now, something that was trying to find a name for itself. "You spent last night reviewing the stellar maps," she said. "And your government's public strategic doctrine papers," Cole said, "and 3 historical accounts of HFY frontier conflicts from the past century. In one night." "I read fast," he said. It was not quite a smile, what happened at the left side of her mouth. It was the absence of something, the performance of composure that had been holding her expression in place, and in its absence, just for a moment, was something that looked like genuine surprise, and behind it, very faintly, something that looked like recognition. The way you feel when someone finishes your sentence with the right words. She caught it immediately, the composure came back. But Cole had seen it. And he knew, in the way you know things that your training cannot explain, that somewhere underneath all the layers of title and power, and the way she held herself in public like armor made elegant, she was looking at him the same way. Neither of them said anything about it. They spent the next 4 hours working through the buffer zone proposal, and by the end of it they had built something that neither delegation had come in with, something that was better than either side's starting position, and the room felt different by the time it was done. Warmer, more actual. Saya walked out of the session without looking back at him. But at the door just before she turned the corner she paused, just for a second, then she was gone. Cole sat with the stellar maps still spread on the table in front of him, and thought about left side of the mouth almost smiles, and the question he had written in his notebook last night, and he still did not know the answer, but for the first time he felt like the shape of it was becoming visible. The HFY had a ceremony for the 3rd day of diplomatic talks. It was called the Tessari, which translated loosely as the placing of names, and it was one of those traditions that had survived 3,000 years of HFY history because it served a function that transcended politics. Each delegation selected one representative to speak briefly, not about positions or boundaries or trade agreements, but about why they had come, not diplomatically, personally. Ambassador Graves had asked Cole to represent the human delegation. He had not argued, which surprised her, because Cole argued with most things she asked. He had simply said, "All right," and spent the rest of the evening sitting quietly in the window seat of his east wing chamber with the amber-orange glow of the canyon below him, and whatever he was thinking, he kept it to himself. The ceremony took place in the open-air courtyard at the center of the diplomatic complex. It was evening, and the HFY capital's sky was doing what it did at this hour, turning 3 distinct shades of violet and deep green as the twin suns set below different horizons. The temperature had dropped, but Cole's uniform had a thermal layer, and he had long since trained himself out of visible discomfort with cold. 9 representatives from each side stood in a broad circle. In the center, a small basin held something that burned with white light and no heat. HFY custom required you to step into the circle, speak, and then touch the basin's edge before stepping back. Cole had read about this in his briefing materials and had practiced the motion until it was smooth. He was the last of the human delegation to go. He stepped forward. Around the circle, 36 faces watched him. He looked at none of them in particular, which was a technique, a way of speaking to a room by refusing to be narrowed into a single point. "I was on a moon called Tessara 23 years ago," he said. "It was my 4th deployment and probably my least successful in every measurable way. We failed to hold 2 of our 3 objectives, the terrain was wrong for our equipment, and the acid storms made everything harder than it already was. But something happened there that I have thought about ever since." He paused, not for drama, because the next part needed room. 3 HFY survivors reached our camp on the 3rd day. They were not allies, they were not enemies. They were people who had needed somewhere to be when the sky was wrong and we were there. I watched my unit argue for an hour about what to do, and while they argued I made a decision. I did what was in front of me to do. not because a rule said to. Because it was the only answer that made sense when you looked at the people in front of you, instead of the category they belonged to. He let that sit. I came to these talks because I believe what was true on that moon is still true, that the thing in front of you is more important than the category you have put it in, that the answer is almost always in the room if you look at the actual people in the room rather than the positions they arrived with. That is why I am here. He touched the edge of the basin. The light did not change, but the material was warm under his fingers in a way that had nothing to do with the flame. He stepped back. The circle was quiet for a moment. Then he made the mistake, or perhaps the decision, he was never quite sure afterward, of looking up. And he found, without intending to, that he was looking directly at Saya. She was in the inner ring, not as a speaking representative but in her capacity as heir and host. She had been still through every speech, her expression formal and correct. Now she was looking at him with something he had not seen from her before, something that had bypassed the careful architecture of her face and was just there, undisguised, for exactly 2 seconds before she brought it under control. He knew what it was. It was the look of someone who has just heard something familiar said in an unexpected voice. He looked away. After the ceremony, there was a formal reception, which Cole navigated on 3 cups of the only Vethari beverage his system could handle, a mildly sweet fermented grain thing that tasted like apple cider if you did not think too hard about what it actually was. He spoke with 2 trade liaisons, 3 aides, and correspondent 11, who told him in its layered, translated voice that his speech had been geometrically elegant, which Cole chose to accept as a compliment. He was on his way back toward the east wing when he heard her. "The moon," she said, "Tessara." He turned. Saya was standing at the edge of the courtyard, out of the light, 2 of her hands folded in front of her and the other 2 loose at her sides. Her formal reception manner was still in place but thinner, like a window with the light behind it. "Yes," he said. "My mother was on Tessara," she said. "During the campaign, she was evacuated by a human unit." Cole kept his face completely still. "I know," he said. "She told me." Saya's markings shifted. "She told you when?" "Yesterday, in the alcove." Saya was very quiet for a moment. Around them, the courtyard slowly emptied of other people, Vethari and humans drifting back inside, the white burning basin guttering down to a glow. The violet-green sky had gone fully dark. The canyon beyond the complex walls glowed amber beneath them. "She did not tell me she spoke to you," Saya said. "I know," Cole said. "What did she tell you?" Cole looked at her. He had been thinking about this moment since yesterday afternoon, turning it over, trying different versions of it, and now that it was here he understood that there was only one version that was honest, and honesty was the only approach that had any chance of going somewhere good. "She told me about Tessara," he said. "What happened there and after?" Saya studied him. Her markings were doing something complex, layering colors he did not have names for. "After," she said slowly, and then with the quality of someone who is very intelligent and has just assembled a thing they were not expecting to assemble, "you were there, at the camp." "Yes," Cole said. Silence. "You were the soldier," she said, "the one she has spoken about." Cole said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Saya looked at him for a very long time. The canyon glowed. The reception sounds from inside the building were faint and inconsequential. She looked at him the way she had looked at him during the session when he finished the right sentence, but deeper now and searching, and something that was starting to look like afraid, not of him, but of what she was about to understand. "How old are you?" she said. Cole answered honestly. He watched the math happen in her face. It happened very slowly, and then very quickly. And then she stood completely still, and her markings went to a color he had never seen, not in any briefing, not in any cultural document, a color he would later learn was unique to Vethara individuals experiencing the specific sensation of the world reorganizing itself around a new, irreversible truth. The wind moved through the courtyard. Somewhere the last of the white flame went out. Cole waited. "Oh," she said, one syllable, a word that contained about 40 different things. Then she turned and walked inside. Cole stood in the empty courtyard by himself for a few minutes, hands in his pockets, the same unconscious gesture from the alcove, the one his professional training had never managed to remove, and looked at the canyon and thought about the word father, and how it did not feel like a real word yet. The way a word you have said 100 times can suddenly lose its meaning if you look at it from the wrong angle, except in reverse. A word that had no angle before suddenly becoming a real shape in real space. Then he went inside. He found Vala at the end of the east corridor. She was standing still, and she looked at him as he approached, and he understood that she knew. "She worked it out," he said. "I expected she would," Vala said. "You could have told her yourself," Cole said. "You have had 22 years. "Yes," Vala said. "Why tonight? Why this way?" Vala was quiet for a moment, then, because she needed to see you first, as a person, before she knew the rest. If I had told her without that, she would have received it as information, a fact to be processed and filed. Instead a pause. She is not processing it as a fact. "No," Cole agreed. Vala looked toward the door her daughter had gone through. "She will need time." "So will I," Cole said. They stood in the corridor in silence for a moment, two people who had been strangers with a shared history for 23 years, and then the diplomat in Cole surfaced enough to say, quietly, "The talks. The buffer zone agreement. Is that still the priority?" "It was never not the priority," Vala said. "I know," Cole said. "I just wanted to make sure we both still know that." Vala looked at him then with something that was not the controlled diplomat face, not the carefully rehearsed tone from the alcove. Something unguarded. "I made the right decision," she said. "On Tessara, whatever comes next, I made the right one." Cole thought about a dead moon with acid storms, and a woman who had watched everything with eyes that processed rather than just observed, and 3 days later had touched both her upper hands together and said something about not forgetting. "Yeah," he said. "I think you did." He went to his room and sat at the window with the canyon glowing amber below him and his notebook open on the sleeping platform, and he did not write anything. He just sat. And for the first time in a very long time, the kind of quiet that settled around him was not the quiet of a man who has learned to be alone in difficult rooms. It was something else. Something that did not quite have a name yet, but felt like the beginning of one. 3 days later, Saya knocked on his door. It was early morning, the kind of hour that felt private even in a building full of people, and she was not in her formal reception clothes or her diplomatic session attire. She was wearing a simple gray outer robe with her copper rose markings visible at her collar, and she had only 2 of her 4 hands visible, the other 2 tucked in the robe's interior pockets, which Cole's cultural research told him was a Vethare posture of personal rather than formal address. She had not slept or had slept badly, he could see it. He stepped back from the door to let her in. She came in and stood in the middle of the room and looked at the canyon window for a moment, and then at the stellar maps still spread across the work surface, and then at his notebook on the edge of the sleeping platform, and then at him. "I have not been kind to you," she said. "I want to acknowledge that." "You have not been unkind to me," Cole said. "You were dismissive, that's different." "It is not much of a distinction." "It is to me," he said. "Unkind requires intent. You were making assumptions, everyone does that." She looked at him steadily. "Are you always this careful with language?" "Mostly," he said. "It matters." She moved to the window and looked out at the canyon. He let her have the silence. He was good at that. "I have been thinking about what it means," she said eventually. "What I am supposed to feel about it. I keep arriving at the question and then going around it. That's fair, Cole said. It's a strange situation. It is more than strange, she said. I am the heir to the Vethari dominion. My father, the person I was told was my father before I was told this, died when I was 3. He was Vethari. He had 4 arms and copper markings and a military record that covered 16 campaigns. She paused. You are a human security officer who caught a blade with his arm and then fixed my territorial buffer zone. When you list it out like that, Cole said, it does have a certain quality to it. She looked at him. Something was working behind her eyes, something that was deciding whether to let itself be visible. Do you have other children? She said. No, Cole said. Have you been married, partnered? Twice, he said. Neither of them ended badly. They ended because my job was the thing I was most committed to, and after a certain amount of time, the people I was with arrived at the honest conclusion that the job would not stop being true. He paused. I do not say that as a thing to be proud of. It is just what it was. Saya absorbed this. You chose the work. I chose what I understood how to do, Cole said. That is a more accurate way to put it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I also choose what I understand how to do, more often than I choose what I feel. Cole said, I noticed. She looked at him, and the left side of her mouth did the thing again, that fractional departure from the performance of composure, and this time she did not bring it back immediately. That is either a criticism or a recognition, she said. Both, Cole said, they can be both. She turned back to the window. The canyon was pale bright in the morning light now, the amber glow replaced by something cooler and clearer. She stood with 2 hands folded in front of her and 2 in her pockets, and she said, My mother does not do anything without a reason, telling you before she told me, placing you in the secondary sessions. This, she gestured at the space between them with 1 hand, a gesture that included the room and the conversation and apparently everything that had led to it. She wanted us to talk, to know each other before we knew the rest. She told me as much, Cole said. She believed it would change things. It did. Saya turned to look at him directly. For you. Yes, Cole said. How? She said, not challenging, genuinely asking in the way people ask when they are trying to understand something that touches them. Cole thought about this honestly, the way he tried to think about everything. Before Tessara, I was very good at my work and had no particular idea why the work mattered beyond the obvious reasons, he said. After Tessara, I was still very good at it, but something had shifted. I spent a long time thinking the shift was about the mission, the failures there, what I should have done differently. He paused. I think now the shift was about your mother. About those 9 days and the conversations, and the strange fact that talking to a person you barely share a language with can sometimes clarify things that nothing else will. And learning about me, Saya said 3 days ago. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, I have been doing this job for 15 years and I have been good at it. I have been in 100 rooms with 100 difficult situations and I have managed. I have not had anyone to manage for, not specifically, not in a way that was mine. He looked at her. That is new. Saya looked back at him for a long time. I am 22 years old, she said. I have been running a Dominion's transition protocol for 4 years. I have made decisions that affect billions of people. I am not someone who needs someone to manage for her. I know, Cole said, that is not what I meant. She waited. I meant, he said carefully, that there is a difference between the work you do for what it accomplishes and the work you do because someone you care about is in the world, not because they need you to do it. Just because the caring changes what you bring to it. Saya was very still. Then she said very quietly, My mother talks about that, the difference. She never told me exactly what she meant by it. Now you know what she meant, Cole said. The morning light shifted. The canyon below them went from pale to bright. Somewhere in the diplomatic complex, The sound of preparation for the day's sessions was beginning, doors, voices, the low hum of systems coming online. Saya said, "I want you to stay for the full summit." Cole looked at her. "The full summit is 14 more days." "Yes," she said, "Ambassador Graves has been informed she is agreeable." A pause. "The territorial framework needs another voice that has read all the stellar maps and understands why the Kessa Lane approach matters." And she stopped, started again. "I would like more time." "To figure out what this is," Cole said. "Yes," she said, "if that is acceptable to you." Cole looked at the canyon. He thought about a cold, black bench in an alcove and 72 floor tiles, and a notebook with a question that had not yet found its answer. He thought about 15 years of work he was proud of, and the new, strange quality that had started to settle over it since 3 days ago. He thought about the left side of a smile that looked like something he recognized from mirrors. "Yes," he said. "That is acceptable." The tension that had been holding Saya's posture fractured slightly, not much, just enough to see, and she nodded once carefully and then turned toward the door. At the door she stopped. She did not turn all the way around. "The honor guard incident," she said. "The first day. Orath told me you chose the forearm contact point deliberately, for bone density." "Yes," Cole said. "He also said you held the takedown at minimum necessary force." "There was no reason to do more," Cole said. A pause. "No," she said, "there was not." Another pause, shorter. "That is something I will think about." She left. Cole stood in the morning light for a long time. He picked up his notebook. He found the question he had written, "What does she deserve to know?" He crossed it out very slowly and wrote underneath it, "She knows." Then he closed the notebook, straightened his uniform by habit, tugged the hem twice, and went out to do the work. In the corridor he passed Vala coming from the opposite direction. They looked at each other. No words were needed. Vala's copper markings were the deep, quiet color they had been in the alcove, the color of something settled. She gave him a very small nod. He gave her one back. Then they each went their separate ways, toward their separate rooms and responsibilities, connected by a 23-year thread that had, in 4 days, become something none of the three of them had words for yet in any language they shared. But words were not always the first thing. Sometimes the first thing was just the fact of it, real, present, and beginning. The peace summit continued. The talks, for the first time in 6 months, went well. And in the evenings, when the sessions ended, and the canyon glowed amber in the dark below the diplomatic complex, a human soldier and a Vethari princess sat on opposite sides of a window ledge that was built for a different species, and talked about stellar maps and territorial boundaries and careful language, and what it meant to choose the thing in front of you over the category you had put it in, and slowly. With the particular patience of people who have both spent their lives building things worth building, they began to learn each other's names.